All right, welcome today to Hunting Illinois podcast. With us today, we actually have, I'm Jason Buckley. With us, we have Curtis, and visiting us from the UK is Dan Reynolds, who is the director of BASC, which is the British Association of Shooting and Conservation. So Dan, would you like to introduce yourself and kind of tell us a little bit more about BASC?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Dan Reynolds. I'm BASC's director for England. So I cover all of our forward-facing engagement activity that we do over here through our association. So a little bit about BASC. We are a membership organisation, and we do everything related to shooting and conservation. So the two are absolutely linked, and we drive home the sector stuff which we need to do. So best practice, guidance, legal aspects of what you need to do to be compliant with the various laws over here. So we deliver that best practice work. But we're also an organisation who deals with political things. So we are a lobbying organisation. So we do lobbying of government when there are changes that affect shooting over here. But we also do a huge amount of conservation work. So encouraging our members, of which we have about 150,000, encouraging them to do conservation work on the ground, because they have access to a huge amount of land and they can do a huge amount of good from the conservation related to shooting. So that is us in a nutshell.
Yeah, and then with over those 150,000 members, that makes you guys the largest organization of your type in England, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Mm-hmm. So do you have an equivalent organization in America that you would compare yourself to give Americans kind of a concept of who you're kind of like over here? Is it similar to like Pheasants Forever, or is it more geared towards?
Yeah, Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited, that sort of thing. I mean, I would say our conservation-based activity is not to that scale, but it gives you a perspective of the work that we might do on ground with the people who shoot, but also the work we might do within the legal system and political system to sort of bolster the work and the good stuff that shooting does.
Sure. And then you guys do a lot of research as well, and that's kind of one reason why we had you on here, because we met your organization when Matt Ellis came over to the University of Illinois and was over here for a few months over the past couple of years, and we got to know him pretty well. And you guys have done a lot of research on lead ammunition and non-toxic shot, and kind of comparing the two, and then also looking at the negative aspects of lead ammunition and the environment and things like that. So that's kind of the topic we're going to be talking about here today. And so can you have a brief history of kind of lead regulation, at least in the UK? I have a couple things here from America.
Yeah, so lead regulation in the UK, and it's really interesting times for us at the moment, because we've got potentially a very big legal change coming. But to sort of go back, shooting in England, in the UK, has existed for hundreds of years, albeit in various different shapes and forms. But we didn't get any regulation on lead shot until 1999. So we had something which came in, which is the Environmental Protection Regulations, and that prohibited the use of lead shot in England and Wales. It prohibited the use of lead shot for shooting of waterfowl, and in Scotland and Northern Ireland, which are the two other component countries within the UK, it prohibited the use of lead shot over wetlands. So there's a slight difference in how we delivered the law, but ultimately very similar to legislation that you guys have over there, which prohibits use of lead shot for shooting of waterfowl. So outside of that, we don't have any other legal regulation prohibiting the use of lead shot, and so we can use it for all other forms of shooting. So pheasant shooting, we can use it in rifle ammunition for deer, for shooting deer, and what we call pest mammals, so things like foxes, rabbits, those sorts of things. So there's no restriction on that. 2 years ago, and we'll talk, I'm sure, about the risks around lead ammunition later on, but 2 years ago, the Shooting organisations over here. So BASC is the largest, and it's one of about 9 shooting organisations, decided that we were probably going to get legal regulation. And so it would be beneficial for shooting here to start thinking about voluntarily moving across to non-lead ammunition for all forms of shotgun shooting, at least in the start, where we might be shooting live, what we call live quarry, so animals in effect. So we did that 2 years ago, and that was a voluntary transition. So by no means is there any legal aspects to that, but it was about encouraging people to try and do the right thing. 3 weeks ago, things have changed incredibly, and we now have proposals from our government for a complete ban on lead shotgun ammunition and lead rifle ammunition over here, and we are currently working on that to see how we are going to respond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then similarly in America, I know in '91 is when we had our waterfowl restrictions first come out, and then since then, I know Illinois specifically has been looking into it a lot more. A lot of the public sites are having a lot more regulations. Like we're having regulations not only for dove hunting and upland hunting, but also for our trap ranges as well on public sites. And also California in 2019 banned all lead ammunition as well. And then federally, we had it banned under Obama at the very end of his term. They actually banned it for federal lands, and then under Trump's term, they reversed that. And then so that's kind of up in the air right now because now we have Biden, of course, in office. So not sure exactly how that's going to fall. But so what is the concern with lead? What's the debate about? Why is lead such a big deal when it comes to leaving it out in the environment?
Yeah, and there are a number of things, and I suppose it would be useful to say that in some areas the evidence is really clear that there is a cause and effect impact, that lead ammunition is the thing that is causing the issue, and in other areas the evidence isn't as clear cut. But to go to the basic view of this is that lead is what our regulator, so the people that kind of look at chemicals and exposure to chemicals over here, they would determine it to be a substance of very high concern. The reason for that is because it has a number of different effects, particularly to humans, but also impacts on wildlife. And some of those effects are sublethal, i.e. they might cause things in humans such as elevated blood pressure, kidney disease, some cardiac issues, but probably more concerning from a human perspective is that it's a neurotoxin. So it has an ability to build up in the body and create issues. More widely in the environment, there are a number of ways in which it could and potentially can create problems. What we call primary ingestion. So that is where shot or ammunition is directly consumed by birds. So, and this is where we get the waterfowl regulations from over there and over here, is because birds will consume that lead directly. The lead, because they use something called a gizzard in their feeding ecology, that gets ground up, it gets mistaken for grit, it creates elevated blood levels of lead and can lead to mortality. The other things that are of a concern is lead getting into raptor species, so birds of things like eagles, hawks, that sort of thing, through secondary poisoning, so picking up carcasses that have been shot or disposed elements. The evidence on that is less clear, but there is a pathway, a potential pathway there. And also because lead left on the ground can work its way into soil organisms, things that live in the soil, get into plants. And then there's a concern there about how it then translates over into livestock or into water. So there are a number of areas where lead is a concern, and in some of those areas there is a direct link between lead ammunition creating some of those effects, which is why our government now are looking to place legal regulation on it.
Yeah, I know. Over here, we've had two big articles come out and some research papers come out this past year about lead ammunition. And it's kind of another reason why it's on our radar right now, is not just the regulation that's constantly being discussed, but there was a one paper that came out in Science about eagles, and about high 40 percentile of eagles in North America had high levels of lead inside of them. And they were trying to tie that back into ammunition. And then also in Illinois, they did a study in 2013-14 that found a lot of lead. Not a lot of lead is not scientific, but amounts of lead in ground deer meat. So they were looking at different varieties of ground deer meat, and again, about half of the ground deer meat or so was contaminated with lead after being shot. So definitely a concern. What do you think? Looking at alternatives, what are the alternatives to lead shot? So if lead's that bad, is there actually a good alternative to lead shot? And what are they?
So yes, so and we can talk about this in two separate styles of ammunition, I guess. So one is your shotgun ammunition, which is gunshot, and there are definitely alternatives to that, which we've obviously been using over here for what we call wildfowling, what you over there will call waterfowling, and we've been using those since the early 90s. So primarily that is steel shot, bismuth, tungsten, and then sort of mixture metal, so things like heavy shot, which would be one of those, a proprietary brand which people can use. So there are absolutely those alternatives. Obvious drawback is that some of those are much more expensive. They cost more than lead does, and particularly for steel, which is cost comparable to lead, is that there is concern on two fronts. One is it suitable to be used in all shotguns, and secondly, if you do use it, is it as effective downrange in humanely dispatching your target quarry species, so duck, pheasant, whatever that might be. We've actually done quite a lot of research into steel shot over here because of our transition and some of those concerns from our members and the wider community of people that shoot. We did some research. So, and actually what that research showed us, we did ballistic research with a university over here, and they used ballistic gel. So traditionally when you do ballistic research, you take ballistic gel and you fire whatever it is you're going to fire at it directly at the ballistic gel. But that doesn't actually replicate how that ammunition will perform when it hits something like a pheasant. So we took pheasants that had been shot over here, we skinned them, and then we placed the skin over the ballistic gel. We then fired lead ammunition, and we fired what we call standard steel ammunition. So the standard steel ammunition is, in effect, steel ammunition that can be used through most types of shotgun. So we use that in the tests, and actually what that demonstrated to us was that lead deforms on impact and is not as good at penetrating into your target. It doesn't penetrate as far. It also gets tangled up in the feathers, so which further reduces penetration. So your pellets from your steel shot are going further into your target, your pheasant, and also that you get more pellets because steel has a tighter shot pattern. You're getting more pellets into your intended target. So what we found, so long as your shot size for steel was one size larger than your lead shot size, that you were getting as good as, if not slightly better results out to 50 meters or 50 yards, however you want to term it. So really interesting in terms of that, people's concern about lead being a really efficient type of ammunition, and whether steel was as good. And actually what we've demonstrated through that is actually it is. And I think there's a whole host of studies which have been done over there with in America on dove shooting, where they've done sort of comparative tests using steel, or blind tests using steel and lead, and hunters couldn't tell the difference. And actually, in some cases, the steel had improved their kill ratios. So there's a whole host of evidence, and not least because people have been using steel particularly for 20, 30 years now, and using it to good effect. So I think for shotgun ammunition, the alternatives are there. One of the things that concerns us over here as a shooting community is single-use plastics, because steel shot requires the shot cup or wad to encompass the steel shot so it doesn't damage the barrel. So we're concerned that then becomes an issue because you're injecting single-use plastic into the environment. So one of the things that we have had going on over here for quite some time now is the development of biodegradable shot cups or wads, and we're using plant-based starches to create those. So it's relatively in its infancy. We've only had that for 2 or 3 years, but those types of ammunition are very effective, and it overcomes the issue of single-use plastics for shotguns. Rifle ammunition, slightly different, and equally quite new for us over here. So there's no regulation requiring you to use it, but because over here we can, the way that we manage deer particularly is very, very different to how you manage them over in America. So over here, if you've got deer on your land, in essence, they are your deer. So you or somebody who you approve to go and shoot them can go and shoot them, so long as they are within the right seasons. But we can then sell them. So we can then sell them into what we call a game handling establishment. They will process them, and they can then sell the meat to grocery stores, to restaurants. So we can sell that wild meat. But increasingly, consumer demand over here is asking for game that has been shot with non-lead ammunition. So voluntarily, people have started moving in that way. And for large caliber rifles, so things like a 6.5 Creedmoor and larger, so 6.5 Creedmoor 308, those sorts, 30-06. The alternatives in non-lead are available, and they are basically a single, what we call monometallic. So a single, instead of being a lead core with a copper jacket on, it's just a complete copper bullet, which is designed to expand in a predictable way and therefore transfer energy. And actually, there seems to have been a good uptake for those, and they're proving very effective. But, and there's always a but with these things, when you go below that 6.5 millimeter, so you go down to something 6 millimeter, so the 243 Winchester cartridge, it becomes difficult. So copper is lighter than lead. So in order to get a bullet weight, which is the same as a lead bullet weight, which will allow you to humanely kill the deer, you have to increase the size length of your bullet head. And then what happens is the rifle can't stabilize it, you lose accuracy. So we've got some technical issues around the smaller calibers. It's not to say that it can't be done, it's just to say at the moment there are technical difficulties. And one of the sort of factors which makes it slightly more difficult over here is that in 2 of our countries we have legislation requiring a minimum bullet weight, which is 100 grains for a 243, which makes it difficult to comply potentially if legal regulation came in around this stuff. It makes it difficult to comply, but the alternatives are starting to come onto the market and actually are proving really quite effective, which is good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm being able to sell your meat seems like that's going to be a big driver on you guys trying to get rid of lead out there. I mean, that's in America, I guess it'd be a personal choice if you wanted to eat lead meat. Over there, since you're giving it to the public, I mean, that's going to be a huge driver on making that decision.
Yes, and there are, I suppose, which is why we've gone with a voluntary move away from lead prior to the government thinking about putting law in place to stop people using it.
Do they have similar to like organic stickers? Do they have on there shot with steel or shot with non-toxic shot on their packaging or something like that?
The opposite, which is there is a legal requirement they have to place a sticker on it which says contains lead, which is a toxic heavy metal, and then goes on to talk about neurotoxicity and shouldn't be consumed by pregnant women and children regularly. So it's slightly the other way around, but one of the things which will come in, and it's already starting to come in, is we have assurance schemes over here. So it is a scheme where you can voluntarily sign up to show that you have attained a certain standard. So we shoot pheasants in a very, very different way to the way that you guys shoot them over there. So we rear and release pheasants on quite a large scale, but that meat is then sold into supermarkets, restaurants, those sorts of places. And you can sign up for a voluntary assurance scheme, and part of that is that sticker that goes on that says not only has this been produced, reared, shot to high quality standards, but now increasingly that it's been shot with non-lead ammunition. So and that is, for us, it's a real positive for shooting over here, is that we can sell to the wider general public, because even for people who will never pick up a gun in their life, actually are still able to participate in the eating of game. And if you look at a lot of the research that our big grocery stores are doing, the big people who retail ready meals, those sorts of things, what people over here want to buy is wild, free range, lived a natural, healthy life, and game meat meets all of those things. But the thing that's really stopping us progressing, so they talk about headroom over here. So, if our market theoretically is 100%, they kind of think we're at about 60% at the moment. And as soon as we get lead completely out of that food chain element, that there is a huge amount of headroom that we can expand into. So more game can be put into the food chain, which for us, from an economic perspective, and shooting over here is roughly we're not a huge population comparatively, but shooting over here is worth about £2 billion every year to our economy. So increasing that headroom increases the sort of the economic value of shooting, and therefore makes shooting safer politically over here.
So over here,
I got a question. You talked about lead being really soft, so obviously it was getting deformed just from hitting these feathers. But not only deformed, but you're also seeing like little parts of that fragment off, right? That kind of get stuck in the meat that really there's no way to remove. Because I know that's one of the, when I started looking for non-lead rifle ammo, it was after seeing that and seeing like a lead shell fired through and just seeing the fragments going everywhere and being like, yeah, if you shoot a deer with lead, I mean, you're eating lead. There's no way to remove all that, because it just fragments all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is one of the things which is concerning our legal regulator over here, is that when you, particularly for rifle ammunition, is that you get a dispersal much further than the wound channel that the bullet will travel through, and obviously where the bullet head that's mushroomed out will end up within the animal. You get a much wider dispersal of lead particles which go further out, and actually there is little to nothing you can do to remove that, which is why our regulator is concerned. So we have existing good practice from our Food Standards Agency, which says we should try and remove the wound channels sort of 10 centimeters around it to avoid that, but actually that lead is traveling so much further. So from an exposure, people being exposed to lead from consuming game meat, that is a concern to the regulator, albeit I suppose I should probably caveat that with is again, in terms of the absolute exposure that people are getting to lead from game meat, when they've looked at it from a European perspective, it's not meeting what they believe their kind of critical threshold to be, because people are following that good advice around handling the meat and removing. But the risk isn't entirely removed, which is obviously what our government are concerned about.
So what do you think the future looks like as you're facing this ban? Do you think that the market has enough alternatives right now, or are you hoping to see those alternatives grow?
Yeah, if a ban came in tomorrow, absolutely, we don't have the variety of alternatives, and we don't have them at the scale at which they need to be manufactured to meet our market demand. So there's a few interesting sort of things which are going on here. So to talk shotguns primarily, so whilst we haven't got the scale of production yet for 12 bore or 12 gauge, 20 gauge shotgun ammunition, the alternatives in, and I will predominantly talk about steel because that's the cost comparative. We've got the alternatives in steel for 12 gauge and 20 gauge. We just haven't got them scaled up in production at the moment to meet market demand. What is much more problematic is 28 gauge 410, where over here we don't have any, other than bismuth, we don't have any production of steel loads in 28 gauge, 16 gauge, 410. And I know there are some alternatives. So I think Federal produced one, which is on the market over in America, but over here we just don't have that. So we need to get those variety of alternatives created, and we then need to get them scaled in production. So it's not to say that it can't be done, but it's going to take quite a long time. And ultimately, those smaller bores are somewhere in the region of 7 to 10% of our market. So it's not huge, but it's still significant enough that if a ban came in, you're affecting quite a big group of people and the guns that they use. Rifle ammunition, we've got a good variety of the larger caliber centerfire rifle. So things like the 6.5 pre-war, 308, 270, 30-06. So we have a good variety of that. We have a good variety. So 243 Winchester over here is probably our most popular caliber, and there are alternatives available, but the bullet weights tend to be quite light. So for somebody who wanted to shoot a red deer, so I suppose the red deer is probably somewhere in size between a mule deer and an elk, I guess. So trying to shoot that with a lightweight bullet, particularly where red deer exist over here, you're shooting at longer ranges. So you've got to think about whether that is A, legal from a legislation perspective, but B, whether actually it has enough energy and accuracy to be able to do it. So we need to figure out A, the variety of alternatives in those smaller calibers, but again, everything needs to be scaled to the level at which we can use. So we have roughly about 600,000 active participants in shooting in this country, across shotgun and rifle shooting, and about 4 million who use air rifles, and probably worth just mentioning that as well. So we don't have the full variety, we don't have the scale of production at the moment, and there are two things which are probably going to make that increasingly difficult. So one is the global economic and supply chain issue. So getting access to raw materials, component parts, machining, tooling, and now a labour force, particularly. So over here at the moment are the number of vacancies for jobs is greater than the number of people who are out of work. So the labour force is quite a tricky thing over here. So not only have you got supply chain problems for all the parts that we need to make ammunition, you've then got an potentially an imminent ban on lead ammunition in Europe. So yes, that's going to drive research and development into the alternatives, but also you're going to get another 8 million people who want access to all of those alternatives at the same time as we do. And I know you guys at the moment, and you talked about the sort of public access on some of your land over there, which is going to require the use of non-lead ammunition potentially. So again, that opens up a whole another sort of market of competition for non-lead alternatives. So that's going to be difficult and problematic. So where I think we will get to, and hopefully where I think we will end up over here, is that we will probably get some legal restrictions on the use of shotgun ammunition and rifle ammunition where we are hunting with it effectively, so that where things are likely to end up in the food chain, that there will be regulation and therefore non-lead alternatives will have to be used. Where I hope that we get to, because we've got existing regulations, not about lead shot, but existing regulations about things like livestock feed stuff, soil quality, water quality, is that you can continue to use them on ranges over here for lead for ranges for clay pigeon shooting and target shooting, because we've already got existing regulation that deal with that. And the risk, because we've, there's no human health risk there because you're not eating what you're shooting at. So you've eliminated the human health risk, and I think we can deal with the other risks that the regulators worry about. That's where I hope that we get to. And I think air guns, which is an interesting, so we've got some really, really stringent gun laws over here, which shotgun certificate is incredibly difficult. So we have to have a certificate of license approved by the police authorities. You have to have a medical check. You have to have sort of character references. You put that into the police, they do a criminal records check, they go through a process, they do home visits, they check your security, and then you have to renew that every 5 years on a cycle. That's incredibly difficult to get for a shotgun. If you want to get a rifle,
what's the home visit consist of? What's that?
So you have a they're not a police officer, but they're a civilian member of police staff. So they will come to your house and they will basically look at your security provision. So that could be, if you've only got maybe 1 or 2 shotguns, they will want to know that you've got a cabinet, a steel cabinet, lockable, that's hidden somewhere away in the house that hasn't got public access to it. If you've got more guns, they're going to be thinking about, have you got an alarm system on your home? Have you got a CCTV system? How frequently are you at home or away from home where there is a potential risk that intruders might, come in and remove those guns? So it's quite a robust process. And then the process for what we call a firearm certificate, which allows you to have deer rifles. Oh, sorry, I think the connection is not great. So I think for a firearm certificate, it's much more stringent again. So you have to have a good reason to possess it. You've got to demonstrate that you've got land that you can use it on. So all those things are very stringent. So people who use air guns over here, because actually the restriction is around age of purchase. So you can use one from 15 on your own. You have to be 18 to purchase one and the ammunition. It's a much bigger part of sort of shooting culture over here. So we've got about 4 million people who use air guns, and obviously lead air gun pellets are what 99% of air gun ammunition is made from. So again, we've got to sort of think about the risks there, and does that pose a risk to the environment and human health in the same way that shotgun and rifle ammunition does, and therefore should it be regulated? And can our enforcement agencies, because there is no licensing of the ammunition for air guns over here, can the enforcement agencies monitor that and enforce it even if they do regulate it? So it's a really sort of complex mix of things that we're going to have to deal with over the coming months. But I think ultimately the future for shooting over here, we'd obviously already taken voluntary decisions that we needed to move away from lead, and if we get regulation which, I'm not going to say reinforces that, but continues us on that journey, that's probably not a bad thing so long as the regulation is proportionate and not overly restrictive. We've just got to make sure that in those other areas for target shooting and clay pigeon shooting, that we don't end up with really restrictive regulation that isn't justified by the sort of the evidence base that's been presented. So I think good things for future of shooting over here. And people talk about the good old days, when shooting used to be this or it used to be that, and they sort of reflect on how good it was, and now that it's not as good as that. I actually think we are over here probably going to be in the good old days in the next 5 to 10 years. Because I think there's a whole host of things that we're working on around sustainability. And ultimately, as with anything now, you've got to be able to demonstrate how you are not only culturally relevant, but sustainable. And we're on a journey to get to that place. And I think, we will be in a really good place in 5 to 10 years. And, in a place where I think more people are linked to what we do because they're consuming and have access to game meat, which doesn't have lead in it, but also seem to be a kind of a sustainable way to source your food, and that's something that people are, globally quite concerned about. And if we've sorted that out over here, it might be something that attracts more people into what we do, and the more people that do it, the safer you become in the long term.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, over here, I think that's something COVID really pointed out, a lot of monopolies that are out there in the world and a lot of the supply chain issues that we have. And one is the meat packing industry over here in America. I mean, there was times where a meat packing plant had a COVID outbreak where 700 people were sick, and then we saw our supply of like pork or something skip a beat there for a couple of weeks until that got back online. So that's definitely one of our points that we tell new people coming in who are interested in trying to get a cleaner source of food, kind of how to get your own food and kind of get out of that system, at least a little supplementary. At least we know it's not going to be 100% for everybody, but it also makes sense that if that's the mindset you're in, you're going to want to do that in a clean, safe way, and staying away from this type of lead consumption that we are seeing right now. Curtis, you have any other questions?
Yeah, just one. So yeah, you talked about the air gun pellets, which is a good thought, but what about anglers? What about fishing equipment? We know everybody's snapping on lead split shots, right? Jig heads. And at least in America, our anglers outnumber hunters like, 10 or 20 to 1. I'm just wondering, how is that bioavailability of lead different than the hunting pellets, and has that been talked about? Is that wrapped into the same legislation, or where's that at?
Yeah, so we I do occasionally fish, but I'm not a big fisherman because I'm not very good at it, and that's really the only reason. I can definitely see the attraction, but I'm not great at it. So we had regulation over here quite a long time ago around split shots sort of for waiting line. So that for us in UK isn't an issue. I know it was something which is absolutely tied in on the European level, so they are looking at it in Europe as being an issue. But it's not something, and I can't remember how far the regulation went previously in the UK, but certainly, when I was growing up, there was a big thing about kind of non-lead shot weight for fishing, and a change in the sort of the law for that. How far that went, I don't know. Whether there's anything further to come, there may be, but certainly it's not wrapped up with our current proposals from government, which is just about ammunition.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never understood that either, honestly. I don't know why there's not more discussion about it. I understand that you're not penetrating the fish with the lead and eating it, but there's still the environmental impacts, just as there were for the waterfowl regulation that happened back in the 90s. I don't understand why that's not considered in the same way. All right. Any other questions you got, Curtis?
No, that was it. It's very interesting to hear about all the stuff you all are doing with all the different kinds of shot, and just even how different it is between the American system and the UK or European system, whatever you want to call it. And that would be another podcast if we just kind of talked about the differences of hunting and wildlife conservation and how it's done in the two different places. That's, at least to me, I find that stuff fascinating, how it's done differently all over the world, and we're all trying to do the same stuff, but get at it a little bit differently. Pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to come back and talk to you guys about that. That'd be great.
No, appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for your time, and good luck being busy the next couple months here, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Have fun reading your 10,000 page binders there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'm sure it's written in a way that's very enjoyable to read as well. So I'm sure it's not legalese at all.
Yeah, as these things always are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Best of luck. We'll see you around.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we just want to thank Dan Reynolds again for coming and spending some time with us today and talking about kind of the regulation right now that's going on in the UK, and then also just the general science behind lead toxicity and non-toxic shot. So any big takeaways that you had, Curtis?
No, just it's so interesting to see how people all over the world are like trying to do similar things, but coming at it from just completely different angles. It's pretty interesting. I thought it was pretty cool how he said that when they wrapped the feathers around the ballistic gel and then shot it, they really saw no difference in penetration between steel and lead out to 50 yards, which, yeah, I mean, that's awesome. And I didn't start becoming a duck hunter, obviously, until non-toxic was required. So I don't have really a frame of reference, but, you know, I've never had a problem with steel. When you take high percentage shots, I mean, it works. You know, I mean, I feel like when people sky bust, they like to blame it on steel. But I mean, yeah, if it was 50 years ago, then they would just blame it on the brand of shell. If it was lead, right. I mean, they're going to blame something, you know? So
yeah. And I forgot one piece of research that I know that they've done that Matt Ellis, I believe, did was looking at crippling effects and seeing that crippling went down when transitioned over to steel compared to lead shot. So actually, when you hit them, you're taking them out. You're not crippling them as much.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, if you think about it, steel harder and lighter than lead, right? So lead, you might be hitting them further out, but is your shot going to be fatal? You know, probably not. And then, of course, those are the birds that are now a crippled bird carrying around a piece of lead, which is basically a piece of poison and is basically bait for eagles or other birds of prey or, you know, anything.
Yeah. And then the one article I read about the eagles was that it was said the head of a needle would be enough lead to poison one to death. So I imagine just a sewing needle worth of lead would be enough to take an eagle out. So if they eat enough contaminated meat, I mean, they're gonna become sick and ill. And I believe that they said that the population reduction, the growth rate was reduced by 4%. They assumed, looking at the data that they had. So we can find. I'll find those articles. We can link those in the description, at least on a YouTube page, if you're interested in looking up the different articles we referenced throughout this talk. But okay, well, with that. Well, another thing before we move on, just talking to him about the regulations, we really need to talk to him about just how different the UK is compared to America. I mean, we always talk about the model, the North American model of conservation, and how all the animals are our animals over there. Landowners own all the animals that are on their land, and
livestock or pests.
I just think about Robin Hood all the time, man. Every time I talk to anyone from the UK, I think about Robin Hood always getting in trouble, killing the king's deer was like one of his first offenses or whatever. But even though it's a fictional character, but that they always bring that up in there, and it's just because it's the landowner's deer. But anyway, so and then them coming in and checking on how safe your guns are and everything else like that is a whole way of going about skinning a cat.
That's weird. And who makes that call? Is it the random person that comes to your house and visits to make sure that you're normal enough, or do they fill out a sheet that's then graded?
Like the time away from home. Like I can't imagine what that paperwork looks like. And then how many? If you get it wrong, like if you have an offense, like if like you didn't have your closet locked or something like that, how many offenses do you have? And then what are the repercussions of that? Like it's such an interesting. I would like to get more to the bottom of how they go about their gun control over there. It's interesting, to say the least. But we hope that this helped you guys understand why. Because so new hunters coming into the sport might be wondering why there's non-toxic shot required on public sites and things like that. So hopefully this helped answer that question for you. And I know me and you just shoot steel anyway, if it's required or not, just because we don't want to consume lead. All right. So with that, we'll do critter trivia. So our last question that we asked, I think a couple episodes ago, we skipped career trivia last time, I believe, but it was how many feathers were on a turkey? Because they used to use turkeys for fashion a lot more before they started farming them. It's for consumption. So it was 5,000 to 6,000. So there's a lot of feathers on a turkey to be able to be used in fashion and hats and things back in the early 1900s there. All right, so then this week it's going to be more of a were you paying attention? But what year did the U.S. Stop using lead shot during waterfowl hunting? So we banned lead shot to be used during waterfowl hunting. What year did that take place? All right.
Or in other words, what year did waterfowl hunters get a brand new excuse for their misses?
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.